There we go. We are here for the Liturgies of Holy Week, and you see on your screen the services that we're going to be talking about this afternoon and evening. Palm Sunday, we're going to be inserting a really interesting discussion of stations in the city that Zach has organized here at St. Bart's, and Ayla's version of Stations of the Cross in art. And then we're going to be talking about something called the Triduum, which is um, 3 days that are continuous. They are considered to be one single liturgy, beginning with Maundy Thursday through Good Friday and into Holy Saturday. We'll be talking about the Great Vigil of Easter, which I think we'll see we do differently on both sides, on either side of the Atlantic. And then we will finally arrive at Easter Sunday. So I'm going to begin with Palm Sunday. We'll begin with Palm Sunday, and I'll ask Peter, if you wouldn't mind, to just walk us through Palm Sunday. What is Palm Sunday?
So Palm Sunday you'll see the official title in the American prayer book is the Sunday of the Passion, Palm Sunday, which I think gives you a sense of the complexity of this day. It's commonly colloquially known as Palm Sunday, but that started off as the popular name for it, not the church name, and it's made its way into the official church lexicon. On this Sunday, we celebrate both the triumphal entry of Jesus into Jerusalem, as well as the death of Jesus that comes shortly thereafter. This can be confusing to folks. If you're thinking of Holy Week as something chronological, it can be confusing that Jesus dies on Sunday and then again on Friday. But this actually goes back to an ancient church tradition of reading all four of the Passion narratives during Holy Week. And sometimes folks will say things, actually every single year, someone says, when did the church make it about the Passion on Palm Sunday? It's supposed to be all joy about the palms, etc. But it was actually never the intention of the church to only focus on the triumphal entry on this day. That kind of happened accidentally in the Protestant years, as we not even intentionally, because in our prayer book, the Passion was always supposed to be read on this day as part of the celebration of the Eucharist. But as we kind of focused more on the daily office as a Protestant church, we lost in many contexts this tradition of reading the Passion on Palm Sunday. But it's a recovery of the ancient tradition and the original intention of the church that we actually read aloud one of the Passion narratives on this day. So the objectives of the liturgy on this day are twofold. We both have the triumphal entry as well as the whole story of Jesus' death, all in this one liturgy, which is a lot for this one liturgy to hold. At St. Bart's, we essentially follow our normal pattern of the Sunday Eucharist with two big exceptions. The first exception is the beginning of the service. So instead of beginning with an opening hymn and then having kind of the preparatory rite and opening collect before we sit for the readings, what happens instead is we have a much shorter procession as we walk in to an antiphon, Hosanna to the Son of David. What we do is we have an opening prayer of preparation. We read the narrative of Jesus's entry into Jerusalem. We read Mark in one year, Matthew in another year, Luke in this year, year C, Luke's version of that entry. Then we bless the palms that everyone already has. And then we walk around the church, kind of symbolizing that entry. And then we continue on with our service. We do cut one of the normal readings we normally read because of time, but we have a reading from Scripture, and then we go into the gospel reading. And there's the other big exception on this day. Instead of a normal gospel reading where we process a book through the church and then read from the gospel, in this case, we read in a kind of slightly more theatrical format. In other American contexts, it can be even more theatrical and choreographed. Here, in our case, we just have 3 or 4 readers switching off the reading of the Passion Gospel, which is much longer than normal, although we do a shorter version at St. Bart's. You can do a much longer version, so if you think it's already too long, I'm telling you that we do the short version. And what we do is we read that again between different narrators, but the congregation serves as the role of the people. So that's why often we'll say, crucify him, or let him be crucified, as a kind of reminder that we in our own ways participate in the ongoing death of Jesus in our time. From that point on, we mostly follow the rest of the service. We do have a sermon at St. Bart's, which I notice at St. James they don't, and there are other American contexts that kind of illegally drop the sermon, but we have retained the sermon at St. Bart's. We do skip the creed, which the prayer book allows us to do, and go straight to the prayers of the people, but otherwise it's kind of a normal service from that point on. So those 2 major changes are, we have the blessing of palms and triumphal entry at the beginning, and then we have the Passion Gospel. The only final thing I'll say is that we read different narratives of the Passion Gospel each year with the lectionary. So this is year C, as I mentioned. That's the year of Luke. So we read Luke in this year, and next year we'll go back to Matthew and then Mark. And then traditionally, of course, the John's Gospel is what's read on Good Friday. We'll talk about Good Friday in a second, but at our service on Good Friday, where we go through the traditional Good Friday liturgy, which is not our principal service, but we'll talk about that in a second. But we read the John's Passion narrative on Friday. So the idea is, in the 3 years, you'll get all 4 of the Gospels because you read John every Good Friday and you switch off between the other 3 on Sunday.
Thank you, Peter.
Thanks,
Ayla, what's
Peter.
going on here?
Yeah, well, in the images on screen, you can see an excellent image of Peter coming into the church at St. Bart's with clergy vestments behind you. And on the right, in our St. James's version, that's us on the street on Piccadilly. We've got lots of huge palm fronds. Everybody's singing as we go. You can and if anybody's very curious about like the music that we use or any of that stuff, especially if it's not online, so far this year we're thinking about new technology, which would mean that we could have a camera follow us potentially as we go and do these amazing things in the garden and out on the street, but to be confirmed. So let's see. So this is something where if you're curious about the music or about what we do, please do ask me afterwards. So here you can see a verger, and behind Tokes, our verger, that's Clover, the donkey. Some of you may know London quite well. Clover comes from Hackney City Farm. And before she comes, I think it's a she-her situation. I'd have to double check. Before she comes to St. James's, she's at St. Martin in the Fields. So Clover kind of has had that experience already and then comes fully seasoned and absolutely ready, clip-clopping down the road to St. James's every year to join us. And the whole congregation at the beginning, before the blessing of the palms, before we go on and we do this processional circuit around the parish, the whole congregation gathers outside. So one of the big jobs that we have is actually having the welcomers encourage people to gather in our courtyard. I know all the St. Bart's clergy will know how that works. And so, everybody's out there, everybody lifts up their palms and on we go. And the first thing that folks hear when palm crosses are held up and the presiding priest for the day offers a blessing is, "Your son, Jesus Christ, challenged the authority of the world by riding into the city on a donkey." So that sense of challenge is wrapped up immediately into blessing before we go forward. And the end of that prayer is, "May we have the courage to walk with you as Hosanna still turns to crucify in our present time." So the present moment is immediately then woven into what we anticipate in the reading of the Passion Gospel. We have what sounds very similar at St. Bart's, a semi-dramatized reading where we have a series of individuals doing various parts. The congregation are the people. It's very moving. And so that becomes this kind of deep congregational participation in the life and in ultimately the death of Christ, and the way in which Peter described how this is wound through into the whole of the service, which is the Sunday of the Passion. It prepares us profoundly for the Triduum and for the coming of Good Friday in a way that sometimes can be lost with the complexity of almost the kind of that the stark contrast between the joy and the horror is something that I think we really can and need to be invested in right from the beginning in Palm Sunday. And that's something that I think I'll be really reflecting on, especially in light of Peter's comments. So here's a little sneaky photo from one of our vergers of the congregation gathering. You can see that we've got loads of palms, and that's Michael, our director of music, on the accordion. Michael loves playing the accordion in procession, and he gets to do it more than once during Holy Week and into Easter, but we'll get to that later on. And the way in which Palm Sunday progresses also means that a lot of people who have palms then come into the church in procession and they lay their palms down at the altar. Peter, is there anything else that you would like to share about this service before we move on?
I'll just note the major difference between St. James's and St. Bart's is you all start outside and have that communal procession together. Here, the majority of the congregation stays in their spot while the rest of us walk around as a kind of symbol. There are pluses and minuses to both of those approaches. I would say primarily our reason for doing what we do is practical, just the logistical challenge with multiple services of Palm Sunday of gathering everyone outside, getting it all together, etc. That's probably the main reason why we don't do it the other way. The second reason is we use the organ, etc., to kind of symbolize all that triumph, etc. And that is bigger at the beginning if you're inside to hear the organ as it does all of that. The other major change I notice is that you all don't have a sermon, but you also do the full Passion. We do the abbreviated Passion, again, primarily for time reasons, with multiple services on a Palm Sunday and trying to get it all fit in there. We've also made the decision that we want to have the sermon, but as a result, we just don't have time to do the full Passion, and folks do lose some of the narrative because of that. There's just kind of a trade-off that we have to make.
If folks are wondering why St. James's doesn't have a sermon, this is one of those moments where I would have to defer to my esteemed colleagues, because that's something that I've inherited, having been there for the last couple of years. And I'm sure that Lucy, the rector, would have a particular view on this. And I also know that there's a kind of a savoring and a valuing and of the almost disconcertingly long collective reading and entering into the drama, the mystery, and the shock of the Passion Gospel. So that's my best guess, but I'd have to check in with her. So I'll add that to my list of questions that we can reflect on later on.
Great. Thank you both. So we're going to move out now into the streets of the city. And Zach, tell us a little bit about how you conceived of Stations in the City and what it's all about.
Absolutely. So the Stations in the City is based on the Stations of the Cross, sometimes likened to the Via Dolorosa, or the Way of the Cross, in the Holy City, Jerusalem. And there are historically 14 different stations where you stop as you are walking to remember the events of Jesus's final hours and his crucifixion. I believe 9 of them are scriptural, and about 5 of them are actually traditional. We've sort of inherited them from the medieval church. But nevertheless, at each station, we stop, we remember a moment in Jesus's life, and then we offer prayers. The version that we use is by a group called the Priory of Ossory. And each of the prayers that we say has a particular social justice, social witness component. And so, for instance, at the station where we stop to remember when Jesus meets his mother, we then go on to, quote, remember the crosses of today and pray for all the mothers of the world, pray for women's reproductive health, and so forth. And we try to find kind of the nugget at each station where the experiences of Jesus meet the crosses of today's world. While we don't process very far on Palm Sunday, we do process throughout the city as we do this, particularly our Midtown neighborhood. And we stop at various kind of landmarks along the way. Grand Central Station, the United Nations, the nonviolence monuments at the United Nations. Last year, we stopped at the Roosevelt Hotel, which is a building that has housed many migrants and refugees over the past several years. There's not necessarily a one-for-one correlation between the prayer that's said and the location, but it's meant to kind of embody this sense of moving through the city, just as Jesus moved through Jerusalem. And it does become quite a religious spectacle of sorts, as you see a crucifer holding the cross. Various parishioners will actually take turns being the crucifer and carrying the cross. The clergy are dressed in cassocks, and so it sparks some curiosity among our fellow citizens of New York. We have a service leaflet that we've used, and last year we actually used we printed original artwork by our parishioner, Gwyneth Leach, that depicted the Stations of the Cross. And for time, I believe that we do about 8 or 9 stations out of the 14.
It's amazing. It's an extraordinary experience. Thank you, Zach. And Ayla, you've got your own version of Stations of the Cross.
Over the years, I've participated in all kinds of different versions of this, and I think that there's such a huge opportunity to be able to make use of our parishes, our places, the city around us. And Zach, as you were speaking, I wrote myself a little note that says, ask Zach for liturgy, order of service. So you'll be getting an email from me, because that sounds like a beautiful thing. And the Stations of the Cross in Art series was part of an event that I led online. So it's a digital space rather than a parish or a city space for something called Sarum College, which is a theological college based in Salisbury in England. And I'm a visiting scholar there, looking at imagination, the arts, and spirituality. So together with my colleagues, we've been running an online Lent course looking at the Passion of Christ in different ways. And the 3 images there that you can see on your screen that Meredith has selected from the stations give you a sense that though the stations that we were working with were the classics, they were the sort of conventional, traditional ones, a mixture of scriptural and not scriptural. The images that I chose were not. And so just to give you a sense of this, with this image on the upper, let's see. Yeah, there we go. I don't know my right from my left sometimes. On the upper right, it's Hessian. It's a very thick sack material with red wool embroidered in these bold capital letters. And it says, "You have been assigned this mountain to show others it can be moved." And that for me seemed to really resonate with Simon of Cyrene helping Jesus to carry his cross, what it might have felt like for each or any of us to bear witness to Jesus along this horrific way, carrying his own instrument of torture, having it cut into his exhausted body, and making a choice of his own free will in a way which had some sense of consent as well as extraordinary risk, political, social, religious, what have you, not only to walk alongside, but to actually carry that object, that instrument himself. And this textile work of art is by a young London-based artist with Nigerian and German heritage named Joke Amusan. And she had her first solo exhibition in London. It's been running for the past few weeks. I went to see it in its first few days at the Taffeta Gallery, which specializes in 20th and contemporary, 20th century and contemporary African and diaspora art. And I just think that her work is really significant and really exciting. And so I thought I have got to use this somehow in these stations. And in each case, including these 3 that you can see here, for almost all of the 14 stations, except for one, which was Jesus Meets His Mother, where I included Chris O'Feely's image as a British artist, No Woman, No Cry, which was an image which was a memorial for someone named Doreen Lawrence, who's the mother of Stephen Lawrence, a young Black person who was murdered quite extremely infamously some years ago, which then launched a series of inquiries about institutional racism throughout the UK. And so the rest of the images that I used, except for that one where evidently that's why I was using it, so some real tie-ins with Zach and what you were saying about the relationship between social justice in our own lives today and these pressing and urgent needs for transformation and the way of the cross. And for me, being able to connect that with really highlighting art by women was also something that I chose to do as part of this series for this year. It seemed to go okay. Some of you who were in the Zoom room this evening were there online for that as well. So it's always one of those things where you think, how did that land? And the Q&A was really marvelous. So I was grateful for that. But having run it once, I thought maybe I could do this again. So let's see. But next year, I would also absolutely love to have a St. James's Piccadilly Stations of the City inspired by you. So thank you for sharing that as well.
Thank you, Ayla. I was just struck by the creativity that you used in selecting your art to connect with each of these stations. Really just beautifully done. All right, so I'm wondering, should we pause at this point to see if there are any questions? We're going to have time at the end also for discussion and just general comments and questions. But if you have any questions at this moment, put your hand up. And if you can put your virtual hand up, it would be even better because we could be more likely to see it. And if not, we will move on. Okay, not seeing any hands. We're off to Maundy Thursday. So Peter, give us a...
All right. So Maundy Thursday, sometimes called Holy Thursday, depending on what part of the ecclesiastical sphere you're in. Maundy comes from the Latin word mandatum, meaning commandment, and is a reference to the commandment Jesus gives on the night before he dies, that we love one another as he loves us. As with Palm Sunday, at the heart of our Maundy Thursday observance is what we do every single Sunday, although of course we're doing it on a Thursday, on Maundy Thursday. And that makes some sense because every Sunday, at least at St. Bart's, we gather and share the Eucharistic feast. And Jesus institutes the Eucharist on the night before he dies, when he says that the bread is his body and the wine is his blood. And tells us to, whenever we gather, do this in remembrance of him. So there are some exceptions where Maundy Thursday deviates from our normal pattern. And as with Palm Sunday, there are 2 principal exceptions. One is immediately after the sermon in the St. Bart's context, and I think this is true also in the St. James's context, we insert the foot washing ceremony. So we read the foot washing narrative as the gospel reading right before the sermon. And then after the sermon, we have a chance to wash each other's feet. This, of course, on the night before he died in Matthew, Mark, and Luke, Jesus institutes the Eucharist. In the Gospel according to John, he washes his disciples' feet. So we're blending those narratives together in having a foot washing ceremony as part of our service. The other principal way in which our Maundy Thursday is different from our normal way of worshiping on Sunday is at the end of the service. So we say a post-communion prayer afterwards as normal, and then we process, rather than processing out and the service being over, we process the Eucharistic elements to the chapel, where we keep the reserved sacrament on the altar in the chapel. There's a garden there, and I think Meredith is going to talk a little more about our night watch afterwards, but clergy process the Eucharistic elements to the chapel while the rest of the folks stay in the church space and sing the traditional hymn Pange Lingua. And then after that point, we extinguish the candles and we start stripping the altar. We scrub the altar, we wash the altar while the choir sings. In some years, it's Psalm 22, the traditional crucifixion psalm. Last year, we tried something new and had the Edward Bairstow setting of the Lamentation, but something kind of very sad as we're stripping the altar, taking out all the furnishings. What we do is that cross in the center, at the very end of the stripping of the altar, we take off the red veil and put on a black veil for Good Friday to kind of signify the transition. And essentially the service is over, we're cleaning up, but it's also a symbol of what happens in Jesus's death. Kind of all our festivity, which we've just celebrated, then kind of goes away. At the very end of the service, once the altar is stripped, the black veil is on the cross, then the presider reads the narrative of Jesus's betrayal in the garden. And it ends with, and all the disciples deserted him and fled. And then the clergy and other leaders of the service deliberately flee at that point as a kind of symbol. After that, the watch over the reserved sacrament has started in the chapel, and that's still something people can engage in at that point, but they make their way there on their own. The only other thing, it seems that with the exception of the end and how the garden works, a lot of what we do at St. James's and St. Bart's is in common. I'll just point out there are a few tensions, just as there are in the Palm Sunday liturgy and the Maundy Thursday liturgy. There's the tension between the foot washing and the Eucharist, which you're recognizing more. It used to be back in the day that there wasn't a foot washing ceremony. That came in the American context in the second half of the 20th century. Putting the foot washing back in and not making it solely about the institution of the Eucharist. And sometimes that means that we overly focus on the foot washing just because we always do the Eucharist. But in reality, it's important to focus on both of those at Maundy Thursday. The other tension is how much of Maundy Thursday is a celebration because the Eucharist is being instituted, and how much of it is a lamentation because we're in Holy Week. And that's a tension in the service itself. And I noticed, for example, that St. James's, which Ayla, I'm sure we'll talk about in a second, does the Gloria on Maundy Thursday, where we stay penitential and do the Trisagion. I'm curious if you do red or white, Ayla, but I haven't seen the picture, so you can tell me that. But these are some of the debates that happen in liturgical spheres of to what extent do we emphasize the celebration, to what extent do we stay kind of in the passion lamentation sphere. And I was very curious, Ayla, to see the A word in your Maundy Thursday liturgy. So I'm wondering if you can tell us about that.
So many questions. Maundy Thursday is, I think, having gone through the Palm Sunday conversation now too, I think, that's really brilliant to be able to amplify where those tensions and where those intensities are. It's the full emotional range in both of those services, and I often see them in some strange, uncanny way as almost mirroring one another in terms of what we can expect as far as moving through and being alongside the feelings of the disciples, the feelings of Christ, and the sheer bewilderment sometimes that seems to really that seems to really be reflected in Scripture, and then how we enact it. Washing feet in Maundy Thursday at St. James's, we have a number of stations with these very beautiful wooden bowls, and clergy, as well as a couple of other lay members, usually lay leaders in the congregation, will kind of coordinate this with clergy working together to wash folks' feet. And this is something that I think for lots of folks can be quite a confrontational experience, quite a vulnerable experience. And at St. James's, as in other parishes where I've served, the line, at least in the vestry quietly beforehand, is wash what you're given. And that to me is one of those beautiful sacred moments of mutual trust. Actually, there's something about consent in being invited into these spaces in all senses, particularly that one. You asked about not only the Gloria, which is one of those strange, tense traditions of Maundy Thursday and the New Commandment, but also the A word. Now, the use of the A word at St. James's which I'm sure everyone can guess, but maybe, I don't know, Peter, if you want to sort of spell it out with your hands or put it in the chat or something like that, feel free. There's a tradition that in Lent we do not say this, you know, beautiful word of exclamatory joy. We don't do that because we're waiting. We're in that penitential season. And I have no idea, to be totally honest, why we do it at St. James's. But this is also a rector question, and I've written it down because I want to know. But I think partly it is about the joy of being present together with Christ, and just how strange and almost intensively unsettling that is. And it creates a massive contrast for us with the drama, which is short, sharp, precise, and focusing on labor in the stripping of the altar. There's a real about face. There's a deep 180 in terms of the liturgy and also our approach to it. The clergy remove their vestments. We literally roll up our sleeves, and we move absolutely everything out of the way together with a group of volunteers. And that's always coordinated with the volunteers by a lay leader who's done it for many years. So there's something about that tradition as well. And that happens in every place through the whole of Holy Week, and especially into those triduum moments where there are a number of folks who are like, this is my thing, this is how I serve, this is what I do. And I think that honoring that, as well as finding new opportunities for participation, is also a really precious thing that we can do as clergy to shape, as well as to enter into the arc of these services in a pastorally immersive way, if I can put it that way, to think, yes, this is something we do every year. And how might the calling and the invitation of each person in this congregation connect with this year in this way? And how might people be invited into something in a new way? The thing about Maundy Thursday that I just wanted to briefly bring up before we talk about gardens, which we really must, is that again at St. James's, and this is a bit of a garden anticipation thing, we go outside. We have another procession where everyone heads out with candles and walks around the garden and the courtyard. And so that contrast between inside and outside is also a really powerful one for us, and one that we continually use. So those who've been with us at Palm Sunday, they then remember that, but they have it at night, is this sort of strange evening morning thing where we're using time and space in all sorts of interesting ways.
Ayla, before we move on to the garden, I see Kat has raised her hand with I think a question. Kat, do you want to just jump in real quick?
Yeah, just something about the A word. I don't want to distract too much, but Foley and I just went to a funeral that was held at St. Mark's in the Bowery for a good friend of ours. And as part of the Episcopalian funeral service, they used the A word in Lent. Now, I've never been to a funeral during Lent, but maybe it has to do with the importance of eternal life. Don't want to get us on too much of a tangent, but just wanted to share that because we were talking about the A word.
No, it's actually it's a really great question, Kat, because we've actually had a couple of funerals here at St. Bart's in Lent, and the funeral rite is actually an Easter rite. It's a celebration of the resurrection. So we kind of, and there are a couple of other days in Lent, feast days that we've recently celebrated, where we can take a break from the Lenten practices. So we do say the A word at funerals, and we change to white in our vestments, and that is specific to what the funeral is about. Yeah, but it's a great question.
Yeah, I was a little scandalized in a good way.
It is scandalized when it's drilled into you. Do not say that word. Peter, did you want to add something?
No, I'll just point out that Adelaide has mentioned in the chat that at one church she attended, the cross was covered in white. And I will say that it's a polarizing issue, the interpretation of Maundy Thursday, one we actually discussed in one of our staff meetings earlier this week. There was certainly this camp that says it's principally a celebration, and another camp that says you need to focus on it being Holy Week and the Passion of Christ. Of course, it's both. And the question is, where do you put it on the continuum? And clearly, St. James's and St. Bart's have similar answers, but slightly different ones in terms of how we've decided to do that. But that goes even to the colors, that some churches you'll go to, they'll be white because we're always white when we're celebrating, and other churches it will be red because it's Holy Week and the color of passion and of blood, which is red.
And you were asking earlier about the colors at St. James's. I mean, truly liturgical and seasonal color, I could go on all day. I'm not going to do that because, my goodness, in the Church of England, one of the things that's customary is to have morning prayer and evening prayer as red, and on that day, and then to have the Maundy Thursday Eucharist and everything connected to that as white. And we go for it. We absolutely lean in to it being a kind of paradoxically wild yet highly disruptive, subversive, and I'm not going to use the word ambivalent because that's absolutely not right, but immersively paradoxical celebration. I think that's probably where we go with that, because the new commandment to love one another is a commandment that's inextricably linked to the cross in a way that the apostles cannot possibly fathom, and neither can we. So to keep it almost in that white gold celebratory zone is partly because of the steadfast love of God, but also because I think it kind of really takes us into the shock of the story, where our celebration comes from at all has some of its key components lodged within the Last Supper itself, and the foot washing as an act.
Yeah, and as you all probably saw at St. Bart's, we use red, which I would say in an American context is fairly typical. But there are American places where you will see white used. And that conversation has happened at St. Bart's as recently as a few days ago. So it's still an alive question for us because our prayer book doesn't tell us what colors to use. So it's up to each individual congregation and their clergy and other leadership to decide which direction to go in.
And I think, just to jump in, that is one of the most amazing things about these liturgies, is that there is this constant tension between triumph and tragedy, between joy and deep sorrow, between the gift of love and the gift of the Eucharist and the gift of service and the impending death and crucifixion. And they're all like telescoped into just a few days, and it just exaggerates the feelings that we may have, and it's confusing. I mean, it can be confusing. You go from joy to sorrow in a matter of minutes. But that's what I think makes these liturgies so powerful, and it's what makes the story itself of Christ's Passion so powerful, because also at the end, we know how it's going to end. So there's kind of if you will, a safety in going there to these places of trouble and tragedy and sorrow and difficulty, because we know how the story ends. So you can go there knowing that you will emerge in the end. I want to move now to this discussion of the garden, and I'll just say, because I think it's a simpler way of, because I'm dying to hear, Ayla, how you guys manage this. But what happens at St. Bart's, as Peter said, is the elements of the Eucharist are processed to the altar of repose. You can see them in the slide on the picture on the left. The paten and the wine, the bread and the wine are on the altar in our chapel, where has been prepared a garden, a fragrant and beautiful garden, which is to replicate or symbolize the Garden of Gethsemane, where Jesus retreated and spent his last night before he was arrested. And So that at St. Bart's has been set up ahead of time. And the clergy process with the bread and the wine to the altar. And the bread and the wine stay there until the morning. And the night watch is open. Now, it used to be at St. Bart's that we kept it open all night long until the 8 a.m. service on Good Friday. And people could come and go as they wished throughout the night to sit with Jesus and to sit with him in the garden. Will no one stay awake with me is the question that he asks, and we choose to stay awake with him that night. So that night watch begins immediately at the conclusion of the Maundy Thursday service, and people can move right into the chapel and sit and just contemplate the scene and contemplate Jesus's words and sit with him as they might have in Gethsemane. Now we are, I think as of this year, we are keeping the chapel open until midnight. Is that what we decided, Peter? Yeah. So at St. Bart's this coming Maundy Thursday evening, the chapel will remain open until midnight. So anyone who wishes can come and sit, or you can stay from the come to the Maundy Thursday service and stay and sit until midnight if you wish. And then the chapel will close. Yeah.
And maybe Zach can just say a bit of a word of something else we're trying with the night watch this year too.
Sure. So normally our Thursday evening Imagine worship service takes place on Thursday nights, obviously. So that's superseded during Holy Week by the traditional liturgy in the church at 6 p.m. And so as to not completely displace the Imagine worship community and their habit of gathering on Thursdays, we're just going to have about an hour of somewhat informal acoustic singing together in the chapel from 8:30 until 9:30 p.m., which will be simple choruses, songs from Taizé, things like that, to help folks kind of enter into kind of mindset of contemplation and prayer. And in some ways, I think there's actually some resonance with the Roman Catholic practice of adoration, in that we're doing it in the presence of the consecrated bread and wine. So it will be interesting to see how folks respond to that and how folks experience it. In the past, there usually haven't been many more than 3 or 4 folks in the room at any given point during the night watch. So it might take on a more intense character with a critical mass.
Thanks, Zach. That's great. Ayla, how does the garden work at St. James's?
I mentioned earlier that towards the end of the service, everyone is invited to go out into the garden and courtyard next to the church. I mean, the real actual garden. And that has a couple of purposes. One is to follow through on this almost kind of pulse or rhythm that we have liturgically through the week of connecting the indoor and the outdoor spaces, and being able to kind of help people to pray and to move through the story and to use all their senses in different ways. 2 is that in our Maundy Thursday service, it's also very practical, because it means that it gives the vergers, who are our sort of staff who do all kinds of things, especially in and around liturgies and all the practical work, it gives them time to transform the sanctuary into the altar of repose and this garden of Gethsemane. You'll see in the background, and there are a bunch of palettes and candles and palm fronds strewn around. You'll see in the back that there's a very large cross in that image. And at St. James's, that cross appears in different places throughout the church from Ash Wednesday onwards. So at the moment, It's in a small niche near the font on the north side of the church, and it's become a key space for people to come and pray and light candles. And then, for example, Good Friday, it moves right into the center and becomes the epicenter of our devotional practice for our 3 hours. Here in the night watch, you can see it being laid down in the garden, almost as a kind of horrific anticipation, a sort of foreshadowing in wood of what will come. And I've found it to be quite an intense experience, knowing that the presence, that the shadow of this cross as symbol is there, even in this symbolic kind of imagery of the garden. We shut the church at 10 p.m. So, ridiculous lightweights that we are. And I absolutely love the idea of having things open for longer. Zach, I think that experiment that you're embarking on with music this year, I'm looking forward to hearing about what that's like and how that feels. The relationship between speech and song and silence is a holy and a profound one at St. James's through these hours, from the silent end of the service onwards until the church closes. You can hear a pin drop. And there's something about mutually respecting one another's hushed silence, which is just utterly profound. It's beyond words, really. So that's us for Maundy Thursday. And I should say too, just rocketing back in time for a moment, that at St. James's, we do another thing. I was thinking about this with Imagine Worship, our sort of kind of quasi version of that, in terms of a more informal and relaxed Eucharist that also has a lot of contemporary components in it, is our Sanctuary Eucharist on a Tuesday evening. So in Holy Week, that becomes something called our Bethany Eucharist, where we share a meal, we use different kinds of furnishings in the sanctuary, and we use oil and water and prayers to connect with one another and to form these kinds of sacred spaces of liturgical sharing together in a way that really brings the Eucharist to life for people. And that was kind of brought to St. James's as an import from another church. There were a group of people who turned up at St. James's a few years ago as a group from another church. Sometimes that happens. Gonna just ... Sometimes that happens. And they brought this beautiful service with them and suggested, should we have this at St. James's? And now, as far as I'm concerned, it's become a deep part of our growing and developing Holy Week tradition. So yeah, that thing of really entering into the spirit of this and spending time in the church in the evening, it's a very distinctive thing. And it's the only time that we really do it in this way.
Now, we spend the night with Jesus, and then we wake up on the morning of Good Friday. Peter, would you like to walk us through what happens at St. Bart's?
Sure. We mark Good Friday in two different ways. In the American Prayer Book, there is an official liturgy of Good Friday, and we offer that at our smaller services on Good Friday. Which in the past we've had two, but this year we're actually not going to have a morning one. We're just going to have our 6 p.m. service. People have voted with their feet. So we'll do the so-called proper liturgy of Good Friday at 6 p.m., but that is actually our smaller service on Good Friday. Our main service, one that is actually been in longer use here at St. Bart's, is at noon. And this became a quite popular devotion. I'm not sure if it was quite as popular in the UK as it was here, but certainly in the beginning of the 20th century, the so-called 7 last words. So there are traditional, this goes back to Roman Catholic devotions, traditionally looking at the 7 things. So we say they're words, but they're sayings of Jesus from the cross when you look across all 4 passion narratives in the Gospels. And so what we do is we break up the 3 hours, like St. James's liturgy, which Ayla will talk about in a second. We break up the 3 hours into those 7 last words. We have some opening devotions at the beginning and a little bit of a closing devotion at the end. But the heart of the service is a pattern of a reading, an anthem that responds to the reading. The reading incorporates one of those words. The anthem responds to the reading. Then we have a reflection, a kind of mini homily offered by 7 members of the community. It's usually about half clergy and half lay. And then there is a prayer after that homily / reflection, followed by a hymn that everyone sings, and then there's a period of silent prayer, which also allows us, if a particular reflection lasted longer than we anticipated or shorter, that time for silent prayer helps us get in exactly 3 hours. So things are timed out, so we have flexibility to have that silent prayer be shorter or longer. But the key point is that we have devotions organized around these 7 last words. And we incorporate members from the community, and it lasts within this 3 hours because, of course, Jesus was crucified at noon according to the Gospels, and then he breathed his last and died at 3. So that's why we take up those 3 hours from noon to 3, and then at 3 o'clock we toll the bell, as you would for a funeral, 33 times, because of course Jesus was traditionally 33 when he died, and we toll the bell 33 times, and then we kind of walk out solemnly.
Peter. Ayla?
At St. James's, we too have our 3 hours from 12 noon until 3 p.m. And each year, a different member of the clergy team will organize the whole of that together with the director of music. And our tradition, very similarly, we have music as well as hymns, and we have short reflections. Those short reflections are all given by members of the clergy team, and I love the idea of sharing them out amongst the laity as well. We always have lay readers for our different readings, often a mixture of non-biblical readings and biblical readings. So for example, last year, our first reading, something that many of you will know, is Audre Lorde's Litany for Survival. So you can imagine, in the context of the beginning of those 3 hours, hearing something like this, and I'll just read the first little bit for you now. For those of us who live at the shoreline, standing upon the constant edges of decision, crucial and alone. For those of us who cannot indulge the passing dreams of choice, who love in doorways coming and going in the hours between dawns, looking inward and outward, at once before and after. And on it goes. There is at least one person, and perhaps many more, where they come to this service at St. James's every year, and it's the only service at St. James's they come to. It's possible that I need to be double sure about this person's story, but it's possible that that's the only church service that they go to, full stop, that year. So like some people, they go to Christmas or they go to Easter. And so I remember feeling quite moved when I heard about that this is part of people's pattern for those who come, and sometimes for those who don't know why they come. You were speaking earlier about the church being open and what that means at various times of day, but particularly churches being open in the middle of the night. You never know who will come or why. This is one of those amazing moments of porousness where the Spirit's work is the Spirit's work, and the cross draws people in ways that we can neither imagine nor fathom. And so to us, that 3 hours of steady, stark presence, where we really invite people to be in silence, however uncomfortable that can be, and to really stay the course. It's a really precious part of our church year together. And the presence of that large cross is something that I remember, I think it was Lucy who said it last year, to not just look at the cross and pray with the cross ourselves, but to allow the cross to look at us. And that tradition of the cross itself as being strangely both dead and alive, active and inert, as a sign that we carry. It was to me quite a crucial moment in us sharing this time together.
Thank you for that. That's beautiful. We should say that there is no Eucharist on Good Friday. We do not celebrate the Eucharist. In our noon service, and I believe in your noon service, Ayla, there's just the passage of these cycles of music, prayer, and reflection. In the Good Friday proper liturgy, there is sometimes an opportunity to receive from the reserved sacrament, but we don't celebrate the Eucharist on Good Friday in the way we would normally do on a Sunday, which means that we go without that day. And it also means that when we do again celebrate the Eucharist, it is a big deal. So that is when I'm gonna turn it over to Zach to talk about the vigil and what the vigil is. And here I think we're gonna find some fairly significant differences between St. Bart's and St. James's. What happens on Holy Saturday? What happens on the eve of Easter Eve, the evening of before Easter Sunday, and then what happens on Easter Sunday morning? So Zach, tell us about the vigil.
So Holy Saturday begins in quiet. It's a period of dormancy. Jesus is in the tomb. He might be harrowing hell. We don't know exactly, but there are no liturgies at St. Bart's on Saturday morning. Uh, Practically, we're making preparations, we're having rehearsals for what is to happen Saturday night. Our vigil is Saturday night. In other Episcopal churches, they do wait until Sunday morning. And other Protestant traditions have almost taken the vigil and turned it into this new thing called sunrise service. But we do our Easter vigil service on Saturday evening. It's thought to be really the pinnacle of the church calendar. It is a retrieval from previous centuries. That is a product of our 1979 Book of Common Prayer and the ways that the liturgical movement influenced our tradition here in the States. So while it has only become popular again in the past several decades, it's thought to be taken from a very ancient tradition. And so the service is to begin after sundown. So we begin at 7 p.m. at St. Bart's in darkness. Uh, there is no prelude. The entire church is unlit. And in dramatic fashion, the presider begins by lighting a new Easter fire, a new Paschal fire. There are some words of greeting, some prayers, and then the presider and worship leaders light the Paschal candle and then process into the church. And row by row, candles up from the congregation are lit from the Paschal candle, and light spreads throughout the church. It's very dramatic. And as this happens, a deacon or choir member or other clergy person sings the Exultet, which is the ancient Easter hymn. Rejoice now, Mother Church. It's a hymn of praise and anticipation, and a hymn that really tells the story of salvation. After the Exultet, everyone has their candles, and we enter into an extended liturgy of the Word, which can be anywhere from 2 to 7 or even 9 readings from the Hebrew Bible that sort of reflect the shape of salvation history throughout the Bible. The reading from Exodus and the deliverance of the Israelites through the Red Sea is always included. And then often you'll hear the story of creation in Genesis, the story of Noah and the ark, the valley of dry bones in Ezekiel. And it's kind of a lessons and carols kind of format. There's a reading, there's a hymn or song, there's a prayer. At St. Bart's, we've taken some creative license with our space and with the lighting. So this service takes place in the round. It might evoke a feeling of kind of storytelling around the campfire. And for each reading, we change the color of the space. So for the Genesis reading and creation, we go green. For Noah's Ark, it's blue. The Red Sea, red, so on and so forth. So there's just increasing drama throughout the liturgy of the word, the Hebrew Bible readings. And then after the final Hebrew Bible reading, there is a collect and some extended silence, and then a big fanfare. The clergy pronounce the Easter acclamation and the A word for the first time. Alleluia, Christ is risen, the Lord is risen indeed. There's an organ fanfare, the lights come on, and we burst into singing Jesus Christ is risen today. And we've taken on the practice in the past several years of the congregation ringing their keys or shaking tambourines and noisemakers as part of this resurrection cacophony. Scripturally, you might remember Miriam, after they cross the Red Sea, plays her tambourines. And in Matthew's gospel, there's this big earthquake at the moment of resurrection. So that's what the noisemaking and the fanfare is supposed to kind of embody, this sense of amazing jubilee and resurrection. So after we sing Jesus Christ is risen today, there's an epistle reading. We read one of the gospel resurrection narratives, and then we celebrate baptism. And in particular, it's an appropriate time for adult baptisms. Historically, Lent was a time of preparing adult converts for baptism to become members of the body of Christ. And so whenever possible, we aim to have baptisms and adult baptisms at the Easter Vigil. Whether there are baptisms or not, however, the entire congregation renews our baptismal covenant together, kind of as the center point of this liturgy. All the prayers and collects throughout the service are kind of weaving together threads. And in the Episcopal Church's Thanksgiving over the water, you hear about the Spirit moving over the waters in creation. You hear about the Israelites moving through the Red Sea. You hear about Jesus's own baptism in the River Jordan. And so it brings together all this wonderful water imagery and images of new life into the service. After the baptisms, we celebrate our first Eucharist of Easter. And from the moment of the Easter acclamation, even though it's Saturday night, it is recognized as Easter. Easter begins at the Easter acclamation at the vigil. And then at the end of the service, we process out. The clergy asperge the congregation with baptismal water, holy water, as we all continue remembering and celebrating baptism. And then we have a big party after church with food and champagne and celebration. We tend to get tons and tons of tourists and Christmas Easter Christians on Easter Day. And so there's a certain intimacy at the Easter Vigil. We think of it kind of as our parish family Easter celebration before we get ready to welcome the masses on Easter Day. So lots more could be said, but that's Easter Vigil in a relative nutshell.
I think that we could have an Easter Vigil event all in itself, just looking at all of those different ways that theology entwines together, the way that that relates to things like Dawn Eucharist. And as Meredith said, at St. James's, we do things a little differently from various places in the church. Not entirely unprecedented, I don't think, but some of this is rare, perhaps, and also a very beautiful way of being together and of moving through hours of darkness as well as early morning light. So baptism and confirmation, we have preparation sessions that run throughout Lent, and then folks who want to be baptized and confirmed do so at St. Paul's Cathedral on that Saturday. So as part of the St. Paul's celebration together of the whole diocese, there will be a St. James's Piccadilly group, and then they come back to St. James's in the evening in between our two main services. So on Holy Saturday in the evening, the first thing we do is that we gather for Vespers at 7:30. And that's a kind of an evening prayer, very informal service with a lot of music. People will have been preparing food beforehand. And in the middle of the Vespers service, ingredients for bread are brought into the center of the sanctuary, and everyone mixes the bread ingredients together. That bread will then go to become the bread for the dawn Easter Eucharist that we share together in the garden around the new fire, as you can see there. And so after that Vespers service, the St. Paul's folks come back and join us, and it's a massive community dinner. Anyone and everyone. I think last year, maybe around 30, 35 people. And we are very glad to see anyone and everyone who wants to come and join us. And afterwards, we have a service of Compline. And that service of Compline is open to absolutely all. And then after that, there will have been a number of people who, because anyone can do this too, but you got to sign up in advance, who will spend the night in church. So there's a church sleepover where each person signs up for a different hour of a prayer vigil through the night in the chapel, watching and waiting. We open the church doors again at around 5:45 in the morning. All the clergy make their way back to church, have a bit of a stretch, get ready to go. And our first service of Easter then, including the new fire and the Paschal candle, is at dawn. After that, we have a whole bunch of Easter eggs. Ah, yes, brilliant. Here we go. And then, so that's our dawn service in the church. Everyone's candles lit from the Paschal candle. And so we chant the Exultet around the font as part of the renewal of baptismal vows for all in this first moment of the Easter dawn Eucharist. And yes, when that service finishes, we all process. I think you have it somewhere. I don't know. Is it
where did it go? Oh, there we go.
Yes, there we go. So we all process together, absolutely everyone, to the Eros sculpture in the middle of Piccadilly Circus. You would not believe who's in and around central London and Piccadilly at like 7 a.m. It would be a bit like going to Times Square at 7 in the morning and just seeing what's happening while singing, dressed in all of our religious vestments and Easter finery. And we hand out Easter eggs to absolutely anyone and everyone. We leave a whole bunch of them around the Eros sculpture, and then we come back and have an early morning breakfast together. And we're joined then by our Sunday Breakfast Club guests. We every Sunday morning have a breakfast for people who are going through homelessness and who are on low income. And so then finally, the main Easter Sunday Eucharist takes place for us at 11 a.m. So you can imagine, for people who've really stayed the course and who decided to arrive at church the day before, let's say at around 6 p.m. on Holy Saturday, by around 1 p.m. on Easter Sunday, when we finish up our service by singing Handel's A-word chorus together, you can imagine how those folks are feeling, right? We've been through absolutely everything together. So whether someone is a tourist or whether they've been coming to St. James's for decades and decades and they sleep over every year, this is such an extraordinary time. So that's why we do it the way we do it, but it is unusual.
We've got processions, and we have an Easter egg hunt with the kids in the garden after our service. We don't go to Times Square. Maybe we should. The eggs are placed in the garden for the kids to find. And there we are.
Oh. I am half inclined to wish everybody a happy Easter, but obviously I will not quite yet. But having been through this beautiful experience with all of you, and my goodness, like time flies when you're making your way through services like this. And I've been very grateful for the insights about St. Bart's as a parish, as well as American Anglican practice, and for all of these details along the way as well. And we have so little time. It's absolutely wild how this has gone and how we have shared together. I'm very happy to hear from folks in these few minutes, of course. And I'm also very happy to take questions by email or to continue conversations in other ways.
Like Veronica has a question. Where did that go? Where
I think
did
she was
Bart-
waving goodbye.